Hi everyone, welcome to English Digest. It is November. I'm Kat.
And I am Pat. We're looking at our News Digest article, which is all about the sort of situation in Hong Kong over the past. It kind of covers over the past year and a half at least, and longer.
It's been going on a long time, for sure. Hong Kong used to be a British colony until quite recently, wasn't it?
The 90s.
Yeah,
yes.
The 90s, which we're actually going to talk about very briefly in this article.
Exactly, and it's that change of it being a British colony to being part of China that kind of really is at the core of what has been going on.
Exactly.
Sort of over the last 20-something years. But let's read through the article and find out what's been happening.
Okay. The passage of a new security law in Hong Kong has put democratic nations around the world on high alert. After over a year of protests and turmoil in the city, the Chinese government moved to pass a national security law applying to Hong Kong. This was done by a Congress in Beijing without the input of Hong Kong's legislative body. The law came into effect on June 30th, 2020, just one day before the 23rd anniversary of Hong Kong's transfer to China by the UK. The law grants a broad range of provisions for how certain acts can be monitored and punished. Crimes of terrorism, rebellion, or involvement with foreign forces are now punishable by up to life in prison. People who are suspected of criminal activity can be put under surveillance, including having their phones and electronic devices tapped. Some trials can be conducted behind closed doors, and certain cases may be sent to trial in mainland China. Most critically, anyone who resides in or enters Hong Kong is subject to the law, which Beijing has the power to interpret as it sees fit. These sweeping changes and vague interpretations of the new law terrified pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong, with many deleting their social media accounts as their speech may now be criminalized. Hundreds of arrests were made within days of the legislation going into effect, and the slogans of the pro-democracy protest movement have been banned and labeled subversive under the law. Democratic governments around the world expressed concern and disappointment over China's decision, and several countries have been working to make it easier for Hong Kongers to emigrate. Only time will tell whether Hong Kong will retain its own system to some degree or be fully and forcibly absorbed into mainland China.
So that is our story, and it doesn't make for very comfortable reading if you were from Hong Kong or wanted to visit Hong Kong or have any sympathy for the people of Hong Kong who are suffering under this law.
Yeah, because it is a law which makes people suffer.
Exactly. And China enacted this law. This is a word in the title of the article. To enact something is basically to start that law, to turn this proposed piece of legislation into law and later act on it. But it basically means it was not law, it was just an idea. Now it is fully law and it's entered the statute books of laws. It's going to be on everybody's, like, this is a law, this happens now.
Yeah.
This
it is in effect.
It is in effect, it is official, that kind of thing. So, and it kind of relates to another word that's in the first sentence.
Yeah, so it says the passage of a new security law in Hong Kong has put democratic nations around the world on high alert. So here we're talking about passage, which I think is the word that relates to enact. So when we talk about a passage, you often hear this in schoolwork when you're looking at things like reading, but this is actually related to the verb to pass. So passing a law means that everybody in a lawmaking body will vote on it, and if there are more yeses than nos, the proposed law becomes a real law. So that means the law has been passed.
Exactly. So it means it has become law and everybody is worried. So we see that after over a year of protests and turmoil in the city, the Chinese government moved to pass a national security law applying to Hong Kong. So there we see pass, the verb, relating to passage, the noun.
Right.
We also saw the word turmoil. Turmoil is a word meaning kind of chaos, confusion, things not being settled, things being kind of out of control and changing rapidly from day to day and nobody really knowing what's going to happen next and normal kind of day-to-day things not happening in the way they should. So it interfered, these protests, they interfered with airports and flights, they interfered with tourism, with the MTR, with just the regular people going to work and getting their shopping done and going home and schools and all the rest of that. Everything was disrupted. So you could use the noun disruption to mean the same as turmoil.
Yeah, or disorder.
Exactly. People weren't following laws. People were kind of doing something completely different to show that they were unhappy. And this was kind of upsetting the entire city.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why the government of China moved to pass this law. And this was done by a Congress in Beijing without the input of Hong Kong's legislative body. So now we know who's responsible. We know that there is a group of people in Beijing called a Congress, which is a bunch of people who are responsible for making laws or for passing laws, deciding what the law is going to be. And they did it without the input of Hong Kong. So if you look at the word input, when you ask for someone's input, you're basically asking them for their voice or for their opinion. So if you don't ask for someone's input, it means you're not really giving them a chance to speak up and say, no, I don't like this thing, or yes, I agree with you. So if they're not asking Hong Kong for input, they're basically passing it in what we call a unilateral way, which is like to say they're doing it without asking anyone else.
Yeah, and if you don't like it, tough, and you can't make any changes to it, we don't really care what you think. And this was, in fact, you could say it was the entire population of Hong Kong that didn't get their input.
Exactly.
But more particularly, it's Hong Kong's legislative body. A legislative body, legislative means related to the making of laws. A legislative body is the group of people, like a Congress or a government or a parliament or any of those words, that makes the laws. In Taiwan, we have the legislative yuan, which is the group of the part of the government that makes the laws. You guys have...
Yeah, it's quite usually a large body of people.
Right.
We have Congress.
Yes, and you have two chambers of it, right?
Yeah, we have the Senate, which is the high chamber, and then the House of Representatives, which is the low chamber.
Right, and in the UK, our legislative body is just the Parliament. We have another group, the House of Lords, but they don't really have the power to do as much.
Oh, I actually thought they were part of Parliament.
They are. They're the upper chamber, but they're mostly bypassed. They can't do a great deal to affect the laws because of the way our kind of government is set up.
Okay, I see.
Okay, so basically it's saying Hong Kong's government, the group of people who normally make the laws of Hong Kong, were not asked to make any changes. They were not asked for their opinions. They were not asked to ask their own people who vote for them, hey, what do you think of this new law? It was just done without them.
That's right.
And the law came into effect on June 30th, 2020, just one day before the 23rd anniversary of Hong Kong's transfer to China by the UK. So you count back, you go, okay, 97. Yep, that was when Hong Kong officially ceased to become part of Britain's Commonwealth and became part of China.
Right, and I read this was actually done not one day, but 1 hour before that anniversary. It was done at 11 p.m.
Wow, that sounds pretty deliberate.
I know.
To kind of, we're getting this done before, so this next year, sort of year 24 of it being China, is the year where everything has changed.
Yeah, and I guess that's what they're expecting to happen. And so what does this law mean for the people? Because we're saying it's, kind of a strict law. It's causing people to suffer. So let's find out how. The law grants a broad range of provisions for how certain acts can be monitored and punished. So now we're using this word grant. Now, grant is a verb that means usually to give somebody something, but in the case of laws or other functions of government, it basically means to kind of put into effect. So it allows the government to take these actions by granting them these powers.
Yeah, grant, you could say, gives. It gives or provides, in this case, a broad range of provisions for how certain acts can be monitored and punished. Here, we're using the word provisions to kind of mean options, different things that the police force in Hong Kong, that the people who control the police, the lawmakers.
Yeah, the judges.
It basically gives them a whole different range of options for how to monitor people, how to punish people, and it's basically set out. It's like a law that says, okay, if somebody does this, they can be punished this way or this way. If you think someone is doing this, you can watch them this way and this way. It's all legal. It's all in the law, and nobody can say this is unfair.
Right. Well, they could say it's unfair, but they can't say it's illegal.
They can't say it's illegal.
Because it's not.
Yes, it's legal options as part of this new security law. We can also use the word provision to mean like the food that people eat on a certain journey. So there are two meanings for this word. This is more of a legal term used in this way.
Yeah, so we have a lot of legal and government terms in this article because it's about a law. And of course, you need to talk about a law in legal language. But we're trying to make it a little bit easier for you.
Right. So what can be monitored and punished? Well, we see crimes of terrorism, rebellion, or involvement with foreign forces are now punishable by up to life in prison. So these are obviously the serious ones, and kind of what's dangerous here is that it's up to the Hong Kong government or China rather to decide what is terrorism, rebellion or involvement.
Right.
They get to say this is terrorism, and even if you say no it isn't, then you could still be punished.
Right. Especially rebellion, I feel like is a very
broad
key
term.
Yeah, and it's very key to what's been happening over the last couple of years because rebellion means you fight back against people who are trying to tell you what to do. It's rebellion against authority. So last year when Hong Kong lawmakers tried to tell the people, like, we're going to do this thing, the people said, no, we don't like that. And they made huge protests. That was a rebellion.
Exactly. Terrorism is, of course, using kind of fear, violence to scare people into acting a certain way based on your political or religious beliefs.
Yeah, usually it's an attack.
Yeah,
of some
to
kind
of
violence.
terrorize people into saying, you got to do this or there's going to be more violence and killing and so on. And involvement with foreign forces would be kind of working with spies from abroad to do something to kind of endanger your own country. It's like you're working with a foreign power in an act of rebellion, for example.
And that would be the normal definition of involvement with foreign forces. But I think they're also interpreting it to mean asking foreign armies for help.
Yeah, like saying, America, come save us. You mean, no, that's involvement with foreign forces. You get up to life in prison, which means the maximum is you stay up to the rest of your life, and they can use that as a punishment, and they probably will.
Yeah, they probably will. Because they want to scare people. All right, now what else does it provide? What's another provision? People who are suspected of criminal activity can be put under surveillance, including having their phones and electronic devices tapped. So if we look at surveillance, these are people who haven't done a crime yet. They are suspected of it. So there's people or the police think that maybe this person is up to something bad. Maybe they're breaking the law, but we can't prove it yet. So we're going to put them under surveillance. This basically means they're going to spy on them using people following them, using cameras, by tracking things that they do, tracking the money they spend, all of that. That's all surveillance.
Exactly. And one thing they can do is tap their phones and electronic devices. To tap it basically means you introduce a program or a bit of software that means that any calls they make or any actions they do are logged and recorded and monitored by one of the computers owned by the police. You will have seen a lot of this in movies, some spy listening into somebody else's phone call or watching what they're doing on a computer and saying, hey, these two people are talking, we can record their conversation, or hey, this person's logging on to their bank account, we can see what they're doing with the money. These are different ways you can tap phones and tap devices. It basically means everything is watched, everything's spied on. Yeah,
they used to call it wiretapping when everything was connected by wires, but now I think they just use tap.
Exactly. Okay, so, and there is another way that things are changing. So that's all about the what is a crime and how can we follow people and check on them. But there are other things this law allows too. Some trials can be conducted behind closed doors, and certain cases may be sent to trial in mainland China. So behind closed doors means that no journalists, no members of the public, nobody can come in and watch what's going on. Therefore, there is no proof that the trial is fair, that there is real evidence for the crimes that people are being accused of committing. It's basically like the police have taken them behind a door, doing whatever they want and saying, yep, that person confessed.
The person may not even get representation. They might not get a lawyer.
They might not be able to speak in their own defense, and the police could use violence or torture to make them confess to things they haven't done. No one would know because it's behind closed doors. Or in China, they could just say, we're not going to try you in Hong Kong. Your trial will be in China where the
laws are different.
And things will be even less fair.
Because China is not known for fair trials.
Or human rights.
No. So, now we know what the law lets them do, but who does it affect? Well, the next sentence tells us that. Most critically, anyone who resides in or enters Hong Kong is subject to the law, which Beijing has the power to interpret as it sees fit. That means if you go to the Hong Kong airport and you step off the plane and they find fit to arrest you, they can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It means if you are subject to the law, that means the law affects you. So normally, if you're in a country, you are subject to that country's law. If you reside there, so you live there, yes. If you visit there, yes. But I think this law even affects you if you do something overseas. Like if I were to go on Facebook later and say something bad about China in Hong Kong or complain about the Hong Kong law, and then next week I go to Hong Kong on a trip, they could actually arrest me and say, you have been rebelling. You are involved with foreign forces. You're causing problems here.
That's right. So it affects people outside of Hong Kong or before they enter Hong Kong.
Yes, and Beijing can interpret this law as it sees fit, which means it's up to Beijing to decide how the law works, how they apply it, who it affects. They can basically change anything to make sure they get what they want. So that's what interpret means. They can choose how they define it. And to do something as you see fit is to do it how you want to do it, not
regardless of anybody else.
Yeah, not what anybody else thinks or what might happen to be written down in a law book. You can just say, no, this is what the law means, therefore I'm right, and tough for you. So we're going to talk in a moment about how people have reacted to the passage of this new law, but first we're going to take a short break.
All right, we are back, and we've been talking more about what this new law means, how it was passed, and who it applies to, who is subject to it. So it seems like it's anybody who enters Hong Kong can be affected by this law, and it has some pretty strict provisions. But what are people in Hong Kong thinking about it? Well, it says these sweeping changes and vague interpretations of the new law terrified pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong, with many deleting their social media accounts as their speech may now be criminalized. That's a very long sentence, so we'll start off with talking about the interpretations. Vague interpretations. When something is vague, it means it's not clear and it's not transparent. It's not the lines are not very clear. So interpretations, we already talked about Beijing interpreting the law, which means to determine what it means and how it can be applied. So how can it be applied? It's very unclear. So that means that nobody really knows when they might be breaking the law.
Exactly, because Beijing can just decide, yes, you are, because we say so. Of course, interpretation is the noun form of interpret.
Yes.
So this new law terrified pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong. If you're an advocate for something, you support that thing and you act on that, usually in a public and kind of official fashion, trying to make changes to the law, making protests, calling for aid, calling for change, something like that. You speak openly about what you believe in or what you think needs to change. We can also use the word advocate or advocate, it's pronounced a bit differently, as a verb.
Right.
If you advocate for something, you try and support that thing, you try and make that thing happen, and therefore you will be an advocate of this particular thing.
Right.
There are a lot of pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong, people who are saying, we need the laws to change, everybody should be allowed a fair vote, Beijing should not be allowed to choose our government, that kind of thing. So if they're involved in organizing the protests, or if they're in the legislative body but they don't support Beijing, then they're pro-democracy.
Right.
And they're scared.
Yeah, of course they are, because a lot of them ended up deleting social media accounts because they were probably speaking up against China, because up until this point, it was legal to do so. But who knows how China is going to interpret this law, so anything they said even before it passed might be subject to it. So their speech may now be criminalized. Whatever they said before, it could now be illegal, which means they could get thrown in prison.
Exactly. We normally see the word criminal as a person and crime as a noun, to commit a crime. Criminalize is a verb which means to make something illegal.
Right.
Right. So something was legal before. If you criminalize it, it's now against the law and people can't do it or they'll get punished.
Yeah, I think criminalize even goes farther than made illegal, because there are illegal things that maybe people won't get arrested for.
True.
But criminalize would mean that you can get punished for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can also talk about decriminalizing certain things. Certain drugs have been decriminalized in parts of the world, so using them or possessing small amounts of them is no longer a crime.
Right. It might still be illegal, but they won't enforce it.
Something like that. So we see, however, despite the fact that these advocates are deleting their social media accounts and trying to not get caught, hundreds of arrests were made within days of the legislation going into effect, and the slogans of the pro-democracy protest movement have been banned and labeled subversive under the new law. So yeah, this was in the news. You saw a lot of people who were involved in the, figures in the protests, legislators, some quite famous people in Hong Kong, company bosses and stuff. They were getting arrested.
Yeah, the boss of Apple Media, Apple Daily, wasn't it? And Agnes Chow, who was the one of the leaders of the Demosisto Party, which had to be disbanded because of this law. Yeah,
a few of the advocates managed to leave the country quite quickly. I think some went to the UK. I think one or two even came here.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of people got arrested, and the slogans of these protests that had been happening before were banned and labeled subversive. A slogan is a phrase, a collection of words, a popular thing that people would write on banners or chant on the street or post on social media. These were all banned, which means they were made illegal. People can't use them. If people see them, they can be punished for having them or speaking them or putting them on a t-shirt or anything.
Singing them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, they were labeled as subversive, which means that something subversive is sort of trying to undercut the law, trying to undercut the government, or trying to undercut the people in power in a way that is kind of bad.
Yeah, in a sort of rebellious way. To subvert some, it's almost like you're turning the thing upside down, so that instead of the authorities having power over people, people have power over the authorities.
Yes, which the authorities are scared of.
Yes, sort of change the natural order of things. So that's why they say you can't be subversive, you can't subvert, which is the verb, this law. You can't subvert the government by acting against us. Everything's banned.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was in Hong Kong. What about elsewhere?
Well, elsewhere it says democratic governments around the world expressed concern and disappointment over China's decision, and several countries have been working to make it easier for Hong Kongers to emigrate. So, yeah, any democracies around the world, I know the UK was very shocked. The US was shocked. Lots and lots of
Taiwan, of course, was very vocal about how shocked they were.
Yeah, so any democracies around the world which were supporting the Hong Kong democracy protests have been very disappointed, because they think China has now gone and played its trump card, and it's everything's done now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There was, we mentioned the handover of China to Hong Kong. There was an agreement at that point that China would allow Hong Kong to keep a certain amount of independence and be free.
For 50 years?
I think it was 50 years.
Yeah.
And so we're not even...
So it should have been 2040.
Yeah,
like that.
We're not even halfway through that time, and already China is basically kind of changing the agreement it had with the UK to keep Hong Kong's constitution, and I guess they're saying, well, this is a law in China, so we can do what we like.
Exactly. Yeah. So the countries that have decided to help have been working to make it easier for Hong Kongers to emigrate. And this is something we talked about a little bit with protest leaders fleeing the country. Emigrate means to leave a country and move to a different one. So you'll see that in the beginning there's this word that means out. So you also have a similar word, immigrate, that talks about going to a country. So usually after emigrate, you'll see from. You'll talk about the country that you're leaving rather than the country you're going to. So they're emigrating from Hong Kong to other places.
Yeah, and I emigrated from the UK and immigrated to Taiwan.
That's right. So I did the same. I emigrated from the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that because a lot of Hong Kongers hold British citizenship or overseas passports, and Britain has certainly been like making it like, hey, you can come and live here. We'll kind of, we'll change some of the rules, or we'll kind of ignore some of the rules to make it easier for people to leave, get citizenship, come here, and all that kind of stuff. So
there's even some people who have sought political asylum, which is kind of like safety from being arrested in other countries.
Exactly. So we finish by saying only time will tell whether Hong Kong will retain its own system to some degree or be fully and forcibly absorbed into mainland China. So this idea of Hong Kong's own system is what we talked about earlier. Hong Kong having its own government and its own laws and its own rulers independent from China. And this agreement with Britain that it was supposed to keep that.
Yeah.
So we don't know now whether Hong Kong will retain, whether it will keep this or slowly it will just become another Chinese city where the laws are the same as every other Chinese city.
Yep.
I mean, after 50 years from the handover, it was probably going to happen, but it looks like they're just doing it now.
Exactly. So that's what they're saying about forcibly absorbed. And when something forcibly happens, it means it's done by force. That's just basically, forcibly is the adjective or the adverb for doing something by force.
Exactly. And we say whether it would retain its system to some degree, that means it might still have a little bit of independence, a few different rules, or whether it will be absorbed, so taken into and made part of the whole of China, so nobody thinks of it as SAR, special region anymore. It's just Hong Kong, China, another Chinese city.
Yeah.
Well, sadly, that's the end of the article. It's not a particularly optimistic end, but this is where we are at the moment. And that's all the time we have. So thanks for listening today for English Digest. I'm Pat.
And I'm Kat.
Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
See ya.